The day the first record appeared on the porch, Silas Abernathy was sure he had heard nothing at all. Not the shuffle of feet on the wooden planks, not the gentle thud of a parcel being set down. Only the perfect stillness that had defined his life since Eleanor and Thomas were gone. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm, a stillness so absolute it feels like a presence. Yet, there it was, sitting on the small rocking table beside his worn-out chair. A single, unlabeled record, its dark vinyl shimmering under the late afternoon sun. Silas, a man whose bones felt as old and brittle as the pages of an antique book, squinted at the object. He was a creature of routine, and this was an anomaly. His days were a rhythmic cycle of waking with the sun, tending to his modest garden, and settling into his creaking rocking chair with a book. The only music he listened to was the rustling of leaves and the distant whistle of a train. The old gramophone, a magnificent contraption with a large brass horn, had been silent for years, a relic of a happier time. He picked up the record, his gnarled fingers tracing its grooves. It felt different. He couldn't explain it, but it seemed to hold a peculiar weight, as if it contained more than just sound. A strange curiosity, a feeling he hadn't indulged in years, began to stir within him. He carried the record inside, a journey that felt monumental in his small, dusty house. With a soft click, he placed it on the turntable, wound the crank, and lowered the needle. The hiss and pop of the needle on the vinyl were sounds he hadn't heard in a long time. Then, a soft, ethereal melody filled the room. It was a lullaby, haunting and familiar. A song his mother used to sing to him as a child. He closed his eyes, a wave of nostalgia washing over him. The tune was so clear, so perfect, it was as if she were right there in the room. But then, an additional sound broke through the music, a faint, rhythmic creak, the sound of a rocking chair, a sound so real, it wasn't a memory at all. It was his own chair, the one he was sitting in, and a chilling thought crossed his mind. The record wasn't just playing a song, it was playing a moment. The silence was broken, and now, the music had begun. Silas's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the needle from the spinning vinyl. The sound of the creaking chair stopped instantly, leaving only the hum of the gramophone's motor. He was still seated, his own chair silent beneath him, but the memory of that sound, so real, so immediate, had etched itself into his mind. He replayed the lullaby in his head, searching for a flaw, a sign that his mind was playing tricks on him. But the melody was perfect, and the creak was too distinct to be a simple imperfection on an old record. The next day, a second record appeared on the porch table. Just like the first, it was unannounced and unlabeled, a silent arrival in the morning stillness. This time, there was no hesitation. A mix of dread and morbid curiosity compelled him to place it on the turntable. He wound the crank with a firm hand, the spring inside coiling with a familiar resistance. He lowered the needle, his heart pounding a soft, uneven rhythm against his ribs. A faint crackle filled the room, then the air thickened with the sound of muffled voices. Silas leaned closer, his ear hovering near the large brass horn. The voices were indistinct, as if speaking from a great distance or through a heavy veil. But then, a word, clear as a bell, cut through the static: Silas. The voice was Eleanor's, his wife who had passed away 5 years prior. Then another voice, younger and sharper, joined in. "Don't tell him," it pleaded. It was Thomas, his son. Silas's breath hitched in his throat. This wasn't a lullaby or a forgotten memory. It was a conversation he had never heard. They were talking about him, about a secret. "He won't understand," Eleanor's voice whispered, a sound of sorrow and deep regret. The conversation ended abruptly, swallowed by the hiss of the vinyl. Silas sat in stunned silence, the gramophone's horn now a gaping maw of unspoken words. The machine wasn't just playing back sounds, it was capturing moments, memories, perhaps even secrets, that were never meant for his ears. A cold dread settled in his stomach. The song he was hearing was not his own, and it was quickly becoming a melody of forgotten truths and painful memories, all delivered by a machine he had thought was a simple relic. He looked at the gramophone, no longer a beloved possession, but an ominous oracle revealing what his loved ones had concealed from him. I will continue the story in English and write Chapter 3. Chapter 3. the mechanics of the past. The following days were a blur of restless obsession. Silas's routine, once a source of comfort, was now a forgotten ritual. The garden lay untended, the books unread. His world had shrunk to the four walls of his parlor, and the one object that now consumed his every waking thought, the gramophone. It was no longer a simple machine but a puzzle box, a mechanical heart that pulsed with secrets. Driven by a need to understand its true nature, Silas began to meticulously examine the device. He turned it over, ran his hands over the polished wood of the cabinet, and peered into the deep, dark throat of its horn. Every part, every screw, seemed to tell a different story. The craftsmanship was unlike anything he had ever seen, a marvel of engineering that seemed to defy the limits of its time. He unscrewed the back panel, the brass fasteners cool and slick under his fingers. Inside, the intricate clockwork of gears and springs was a beautiful, terrifying labyrinth. But tucked away, near the motor, he found something that sent a shiver down his spine. Engraved into the metal plate was a message, so small and elegant it was almost invisible. He had to fetch his magnifying glass to read it. The letters spelled out a phrase in a flowing, Gothic script: "What life has hidden, death shall reveal." The words felt like a direct confirmation of his fears. The gramophone wasn't just a record player, it was a conduit. It was designed to capture more than just sound. It was built to capture the echo of life, the memories and thoughts left behind when a person had passed on. The phrase was a stark, chilling explanation of why the recordings of Eleanor and Thomas felt so real. The machine wasn't playing back old records, it was playing back their souls. Silas stepped back, the screwdriver falling with a clatter onto the floor. He no longer saw a simple invention but a cursed artifact, a machine born from a morbid desire to hold on to the past. He looked at the two mysterious records on the table, and felt a new, heavy sense of dread. He knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. The gramophone had a purpose, and it was using him to fulfill it, one haunting melody at a time. The silence had been a lie, and the music, he now understood, was the terrible, true sound of the afterlife. I will continue the story in English and write Chapter 4. Chapter 4. An Unexpected Visitor. The inscription haunted Silas. It lay like a cold weight in the pit of his stomach, a secret whispered from beyond the grave. For days, he didn't dare touch the gramophone, now a menacing presence in the corner of the room. He ate little, slept less, and found himself staring at the silent machine, a prisoner in his own home. His isolation was broken by an unexpected visitor. A boy, no older than 15, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a gaze that was far too curious for his age, stood at his porch. It was young Edgar, the postmaster's son, known for his insatiable appetite for town gossip and forgotten stories. "Mr. Abernathy?" Edgar's voice was bright and clear, a jarring sound in the oppressive silence of the porch. "My father said you have that old gramophone. The one with the big horn." Silas grunted, a sound of weary confirmation. He had no energy for small talk, but the boy's eyes, wide with genuine interest, held him. "There are old stories about that thing," Edgar said, stepping closer. "My grandfather told me about it. He said it was made by a man who wasn't quite right in the head. A sound engineer who came here from the city, years ago." Silas's ears perked up. This was information he hadn't considered. "What about him?" he rasped. "They say he wasn't just recording songs," the boy continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He was obsessed with capturing the essence of things, the sound of a person's life. He called it soul resonance. The townsfolk thought he was crazy. They said he was trying to trap souls in those records." A chill ran down Silas's spine, colder and more potent than any dread he had felt before. The boy's words echoed the inscription on the gramophone's plate: "What life has hidden, death shall reveal." "He disappeared one day," Edgar concluded, his eyes fixed on the house. "Left everything behind. Everyone just assumed he failed. But my grandfather always said that machine was his greatest achievement, and his final folly. He said it was the one thing he couldn't control." Edgar, seeing the look on Silas's face, must have sensed the gravity of the situation. He mumbled a quick goodbye and was gone, leaving Silas alone once more, his thoughts spiraling. The gramophone was no longer just an object of his torment. It was the product of a madman's ambition, a mechanical soul-catcher designed to reveal the most profound and terrible truths. And now, it had chosen Silas as its audience. He knew, with a certainty that froze his blood, that the next record to appear would hold a secret far more sinister than any he had heard so far. The machine was playing its own game, and Silas was a pawn in a grim symphony he could not escape. The boy's words had unlocked a new dimension of fear. The gramophone was no longer a simple curiosity, it was a malevolent creation, a trap set by a man long gone. Silas now saw its large, elegant horn not as a beautiful instrument, but as a funnel for the souls of the dead. He felt a desperate urge to smash it, to shatter the records and put an end to the terrifying symphony, but a strange paralysis held him back. He was a moth to a flame, unable to pull away from the horrible secrets it promised to reveal. The recordings that followed were far darker. The first was a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, their words a jumble of anger and despair. It sounded like an argument, fierce and desperate. Silas's heart hammered against his ribs as he recognized the fainter echoes of his own voice amidst the din. It was a fragment of a memory he had suppressed for years, a heated argument he had had with his son, Thomas, the night before he left for the war. As the days turned into a week, the house began to respond to the music. The doors slammed shut on their own, a cold draft swirling through the rooms even when the windows were sealed tight. At night, shadows stretched and twisted on the walls, seeming to lengthen and shorten with the rise and fall of the gramophone's eerie tunes. A chilling whisper would sometimes slither through the silence, a soft, disembodied sound that was gone as soon as he turned to face it. Silas found himself caught in a waking nightmare. He would be in the kitchen, and a low, guttural laugh would echo from the parlor, a sound he had never heard before, yet one that filled him with an instinctive terror. He would rush into the room, only to find the gramophone silent and still, its brass horn gleaming innocently in the dim light. The music was no longer confined to the records. It had seeped into the very fabric of his home, transforming it from a place of quiet solitude into a haunted house of his own making. The line between reality and the spectral recordings had blurred, and Silas realized with a cold certainty that the gramophone wasn't just playing back memories, it was making them real. The melodies of the past had become a presence, a malevolent force that was now sharing his home. Silas's world was shrinking, his days consumed by the oppressive atmosphere of his home. He no longer went outside, afraid of what new record might appear and what new terror it might bring. His mind, once a fortress of routine, was now a playground for phantom sounds and shifting shadows. Then, a new record appeared. He didn't see it arrive, but he knew it was there, sitting on the small table by the front door. This one, unlike the others, seemed to hum with a palpable energy. As he approached it, he felt a strange sense of resignation, as if he knew what was coming and was powerless to stop it. He placed it on the turntable, wound the crank, and a single, clear voice filled the room. It was Eleanor's. "Silas," she began, her voice a mix of sorrow and deep regret. "If you are hearing this, then you have found the truth. I pray it doesn't break you." Silas's knees felt weak, and he sank into his chair, the old wood groaning beneath his weight. This was no muffled whisper, no jumbled memory. This was a direct address, a message from his dead wife. "It was never Thomas's fault," she said, and Silas's breath hitched. "His death, it wasn't an accident, not in the way they said." Her voice trembled slightly. "He was so full of anger, Silas. So full of rage. He was not the boy you remembered. He was cruel, and he was monstrous. On the night of the accident, we fought. He was shouting, saying terrible things, threats against me. He said he would leave and never return. I tried to stop him. I told him he couldn't leave, not like this." The recording was silent for a moment, and Silas felt a cold dread gripping his heart. He knew, with a terrible certainty, what she was about to reveal. "I didn't mean to push him," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the static. "I just wanted him to listen. But he stumbled. He lost his footing on the stairs. I saw the look in his eyes as he fell. Not fear, but pure, unadulterated hatred." The record ended, leaving Silas in a state of shock. The story he had told himself for a decade, that his son had died a heroic death in the war, was a lie. A confession from a ghost had just shattered his reality. Eleanor's final words had painted a new picture of his son, a monstrous version of the boy he had raised. The next record, he knew, would likely hold Thomas's side of the story, and he was terrified to hear it. Eleanor's confession had left Silas reeling. The image of his son, a bright-eyed boy who had left for the war as a hero, had been replaced by a cruel, hateful stranger. He felt a burning need to hear the full story, to understand the truth that had been hidden from him for so long. He didn't have to wait long. The next day, a record, darker than the others, appeared. This time, he didn't even hesitate. He placed it on the turntable, his hands steady with a chilling resolve. The voice that filled the room was his son's, Thomas's, but it was not the voice of the boy he had known. It was hard and bitter, laced with a venomous contempt that made Silas's blood run cold. "She always tried to control me," Thomas's voice spat from the horn. "She wanted me to be like you, father. A quiet, dutiful farmer. But I was never meant for this place. I was going to leave, to find my own life, and she tried to stop me." The recording shifted, and Silas could hear the sounds of a struggle, a crash, a gasp. It was the same night Eleanor had described, but seen through a different set of eyes. "She told me I was a monster," Thomas's voice sneered. "She said I was just like her father. But I wasn't just like him. I was better. I was stronger." The silence that followed was more deafening than any sound. The record was over. Thomas had not confessed to his death, but to his hatred, to a deep-seated rage that Silas had never known existed. His son's voice had painted a picture of a broken, resentful young man, a boy who had been pushed too far. Silas sat frozen in his chair, the room spinning around him. The gramophone had not only revealed a hidden truth, but had shown him two completely different realities. Eleanor had claimed it was an accident, a tragic fall. Thomas had framed it as a final, desperate act of defiance against a controlling mother. Neither story felt complete, and both were drenched in pain and betrayal. The lies that had held his family together were crumbling, and the gramophone, with each new record, was meticulously peeling back the layers of a life built on a foundation of unspoken truths. He now understood that his son's death was not a simple tragedy but the violent culmination of a family secret so dark it had been buried with the dead. The two records had painted a picture of a family shattered by secrets. Silas, no longer able to simply listen, felt an overwhelming need to find his own truth, one that wasn't filtered through the malevolent gramophone. He turned his attention to the dusty attic, a place he hadn't set foot in since Eleanor's funeral. He was searching for anything, a letter, a photo, something that could reconcile the two conflicting accounts of his son's death. He found it in a small, cedar chest, tucked away in the back of a forgotten cupboard, Eleanor's journal. Its leather cover was cracked and faded, the pages brittle with age. He took it downstairs, the scent of old paper and dried lavender filling the air, a scent that brought a painful wave of nostalgia. He opened it to the first page, his hands trembling slightly. The early entries were filled with fond memories of their life together, of Thomas's childhood, of their small victories and shared dreams. But as he turned the pages, the tone shifted. The handwriting, once neat and elegant, became frantic and sprawling. Eleanor's words revealed a growing unease, a fear that her son was changing, that a darkness was taking root within him. "He is not the boy I raised," an entry read. "He has a darkness in his eyes, a bitterness that was not there before. He speaks of leaving, of finding a new life, but I fear it is not a new life he seeks, but an escape from himself." Another entry, written just a few days before Thomas's supposed departure for the war, was even more chilling. "I fear for us, for Silas and me. He speaks of hatred, of a need to destroy what we have built. He says he will not be a part of our simple life. He says he will take what is rightfully his and leave us with nothing. Silas closed the journal, his heart heavy with a new kind of dread. The journal didn't offer a clear-cut answer, but it did reveal a truth he had refused to see. His son was not a hero. He was a deeply troubled young man, filled with a rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. The records weren't just a trick of the mind. They were a confirmation of the darkness that had haunted his family, a darkness that was now coming to light, one terrible record at a time. The gramophone was not just a machine, it was a testament, a final declaration of a family's demise. The journal had given Silas a new, terrifying piece of the puzzle. But it wasn't enough. He still couldn't reconcile the fragmented versions of the story. Eleanor's confession of an accidental push and Thomas's account of a desperate, hateful struggle both left a lingering sense of incompleteness. He needed the full picture, the final piece of the dark puzzle. He didn't have to wait. That evening, a new record appeared on the table, its surface a swirling pattern of grays and blacks. This one was different. It didn't feel like a memory, it felt like a presence. He placed it on the turntable, his hands steady with a chilling resolve. The sound that came from the horn was not music, but the ambient noise of a house on a quiet night, the creak of a floorboard, the gentle sigh of the wind outside. And then, voices. He could hear Eleanor's voice, pleading, filled with a sorrow so deep it made his own chest ache. He heard Thomas's, cold and filled with a hateful contempt that sent a shiver down his spine. The words they spoke were the same ones he had heard on the other records, but this time, they were clearer, sharper, as if he were in the room with them. The gramophone was no longer just playing back memories, it was replaying the night itself. Silas heard the scuffle, the sudden violent sound of a body hitting the floor. He heard a gasp, a terrified whimper from Eleanor, and then, a sickening, resonant thud. It wasn't the sound of a boy falling. It was the sound of something being struck, hard and deliberate. The sound of a final, violent blow. He heard Eleanor's voice, now a terrified whisper. "What have you done?" she cried. And Thomas's voice, filled with a chilling, triumphant laugh. "I told you I was stronger. I told you I wasn't going to let you stop me." The record ended, leaving Silas in a state of stunned, horrified silence. The gramophone had not only revealed a hidden truth but had shown him a new, terrible reality. His son's death was not a simple accident, but a premeditated act of violence. Thomas had not fallen. He had been murdered. And the most terrifying part was the sound Silas had just heard, the sound of his wife killing their son. The lies that had held his family together were crumbling, and the gramophone, with each new record, was meticulously peeling back the layers of a life built on a foundation of unspoken truths. He now understood that his son's death was not a simple tragedy but the violent culmination of a family secret so dark it had been buried with the dead. The terrifying clarity of the last record had broken Silas. He felt a profound, bone-deep sorrow, not just for the loss of his son, but for the life he had lived in blissful ignorance. His wife, his beloved Eleanor, had murdered their son and then lied about it for a decade. The truth was a physical weight on his shoulders, a silent scream in his ears. He stumbled from the parlor, the house a suffocating tomb of lies. The final words he had heard on the record, a faint whisper from Eleanor, had been, "It's near the well, where no one will ever look." He didn't understand the meaning at first, but the words echoed in his mind, growing louder with each passing moment. Driven by a terrible certainty, Silas made his way to the back of the house, to the overgrown yard where the old, crumbling well sat. It had been boarded up for years, a relic of a time when the house was a working farm. He stared at it, the rusted chains and moss-covered wood an eerie testament to its disuse. As he approached, a faint metallic smell filled the air, the smell of old, stagnant water. But beneath that, something else. A scent that made the hair on his arms stand on end. He grabbed a crowbar from the shed and began to pry at the wooden planks. Each splintering sound was a drumbeat of dread. He worked with a feverish intensity, his mind filled with the horrifying sounds of the last record. He didn't know what he would find, but a terrible premonition told him it was something he didn't want to see. When the last board fell away, a wave of cold, dank air rushed out. He peered into the blackness, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The water level was impossibly low, but at the bottom, something glinted in the faint light. He lowered a lantern on a rope, the light casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. And then he saw it. Not just one thing but several. A pile of old clothes, a leather satchel he recognized as his son's, and something else, something wrapped in a canvas sack. A faint whisper seemed to rise from the depths, a sound so soft it could have been a trick of the wind. "We didn't mean to, Silas. It was an accident. We just had to hide it." Silas's blood ran cold. The word was not a singular one. We. Not just Eleanor, but someone else. The full, horrifying truth was now within his grasp, and he was terrified to see what else had been buried in the depths of the well. The gramophone had not just revealed a secret, it had led him to a grave. Silas didn't need a crowbar to pry the next secret from the earth. The well, now exposed, was a gaping maw of the past, and he was staring directly into its cold, unforgiving face. He felt a new record appear on the table, and this time, he knew it was the final one. The last piece of the horrible puzzle. He took it inside, his hands trembling, and placed it on the turntable. The sound was not music, but a low, guttural hum, a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the house. And then, the voices began. They were not muffled or faint. They were clear, right there in the room with him. Eleanor and Thomas. But this time, they were not recordings. They were phantoms, specters of their former selves, standing on either side of the gramophone. "You knew," Eleanor's ghostly voice accused, her eyes hollow pits of despair. "You knew what he was. You saw the darkness in him, but you did nothing. You let me bear the burden alone." "He was going to kill us," Thomas's phantom voice hissed, his face a contorted mask of rage. "He was going to burn this house down with us inside. We had to stop him." "We," Silas whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Who is we?" The hum of the gramophone intensified, and a third figure began to materialize, a vague, shifting shape next to Eleanor. It was the figure of a man, not of their family. "He was never just a ghost," Thomas's voice snarled. "He was a partner, a collaborator. He helped her. He helped her hide the truth." Silas's eyes darted between the specters. He had lived his life believing in a simple, tragic story, but the gramophone had revealed a labyrinth of lies and betrayals. His beloved wife, his dead son, and a shadowy third figure were now standing before him, their silent accusations a deafening roar in his mind. The final record was not a memory but a confrontation. The gramophone wasn't just a record player, it was a jury, and Silas was on trial for his silence, his ignorance, his failure to see the truth that had been buried so deep. The spectral confrontation had left Silas on the brink of madness. He staggered backward, his mind reeling from the revelation. The third figure, a shadow, a presence he had seen but never truly registered. He looked at the gramophone, a malevolent sentinel in the middle of the room. It was not just a device, it was a final arbiter, a judge passing a terrible sentence. And then, a new record appeared, sitting on the turntable. It was unlike any of the others. It was perfectly black, without a single groove. It felt cold to the touch, and it seemed to absorb the light around it, a small, dark void in the heart of the room. Silas felt a profound sense of finality. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that this was the end. He didn't have to place it on the turntable. The hum of the gramophone intensified, and the record began to spin on its own. A single, pure note filled the room. It was not a note from a musical instrument, but a sound so clean, so powerful, it seemed to resonate in the very air itself. It was the sound of a bell tolling, a deep, mournful sound that was not just heard but felt, a sound that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. It was the sound of his own death knell. The phantoms of Eleanor and Thomas vanished, their purpose fulfilled. The gramophone had delivered its final message. The sound was not a premonition of his death. It was the sound of death itself, the music that accompanied the soul as it left the body. The machine, this terrible beautiful invention, was not built to reveal secrets but to capture the moment of passing, the final resonance of a life ending. Silas sat in his chair, the sound of the bell tolling in his ears. He was not afraid. A strange sense of peace washed over him, a calm acceptance of his fate. He had lived his life in ignorance, but in his final moments he had been granted the truth, a truth that was both a curse and a liberation. The music continued, but it was no longer a haunting melody. It was a hymn, a final, beautiful symphony of his own life. The gramophone had found its final audience, and Silas Abernathy was ready to listen. The tolling bell, a sound that was both heard and felt, filled the room. It was not a sound of a funeral but of a birth, the birth of a new understanding. Silas sat in his chair, no longer a victim of a cruel machine but a student of the universe's most profound secret. The black, grooveless record spun on its own, a silent testament to the invisible music it was creating. He felt his body, once heavy and tired, becoming light. His vision, once blurred by age, sharpened. He could see not just the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, but the very air itself, a shimmering, vibrant energy. He could hear not just the tolling bell, but a symphony of other sounds, the soft whisper of the wind on the other side of the world, the distant rumble of a train he knew was 100 miles away, the quiet creak of a house a century old. The gramophone was not a recorder of the past but a conductor of the present. It didn't just play back memories, it captured the resonance of the moment of death, the final, unique sound that a life makes as it ends. The lullaby of his mother was not a memory of her voice but the sound of her last breath. The conversation with his wife and son was not a recording of a long-ago argument but the sound of their souls leaving their bodies. Silas understood. The gramophone had not been revealing secrets, it had been revealing a new reality. A reality where the dead were not gone but simply a part of a different kind of music, a symphony of existence that was always playing, always present. The sound he was hearing, his own death knell, was not a foretelling of his end but the beginning of his new song, the first note of his own unique melody. He was not a prisoner of the past but a participant in the eternal present. He looked at the gramophone, no longer a cursed object, but a beautiful instrument that had guided him to the final stage of his life, a stage that was not an ending but a continuation. The black record continued to spin, a silent symphony of his final moments. Silas Abernathy, a man who had lived his life in the quiet solitude of his porch, was now a conductor in a grand, unseen orchestra. The tolling bell faded, replaced by a low, resonant hum, a sound that was at once peaceful and profound. It was the sound of a life ending, but it was not a sound of sorrow. It was the hum of acceptance, the melody of a soul at peace. He felt a gentle breeze on his face, but he knew it was not a wind from the world outside. It was the final breath of his own life, a gentle sigh that carried with it all his fears and regrets. The house around him seemed to grow larger, the world outside smaller. The familiar scent of old wood and dust was replaced by a sweet, earthy smell, the smell of the very soil his feet had touched for a lifetime. He could feel the roots of his home, the foundation of his family's history, a deep, comforting connection to the earth itself. His body, once a source of pain and weariness, was no longer a cage. He felt a lightness, a sense of freedom he had never known. The lies, the secrets, the decades of buried truths, they were all gone, dissolved into the ether, replaced by a simple, profound understanding. He had not been a victim of a curse but a participant in a final, beautiful dance. The gramophone was not a malevolent curse but a kind guide, a lighthouse that had led him to the shore of a new reality. The last of his life's energy was ebbing away, and Silas smiled. He was not dying, he was simply joining the symphony. His final breath was a long, slow note, a final harmony that would join the music of his loved ones. The gramophone, now a silent, beautiful sentinel, had delivered him to his final destination. He closed his eyes, his old body a vessel that was now empty, his soul now a part of the grand, eternal melody. The silence returned, but this time, it was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a life completed, a beautiful note in a grander song. The old man was gone, but his song, a new and final melody, would play forever in the quiet stillness of the house on the hill. The house on the hill fell silent. The gramophone, its purpose fulfilled, stood as a silent witness to a life's end. It was no longer a purveyor of torment, but a beautiful, silent monument to a man's final, peaceful journey. The old man's chair sat empty on the porch, a silent testament to the life that had been lived, and the secret that had been revealed. Years passed. The house, like a quiet old man, settled into a peaceful slumber. The vines crept over the porch, the paint peeled, and the windows, once a portal to a tormented world, were now a reflection of the quiet, changing seasons. The gramophone, a silent sentinel, stood untouched in the corner of the parlor, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. One day, a young boy, Edgar, now a man in his prime, returned to the old house. He had inherited it from his family, a family who had long since forgotten the old stories and legends. He remembered the old man, Silas, but he dismissed the whispers about the cursed gramophone as the simple foolishness of an old man's mind. He opened the door, and the house welcomed him with a familiar scent of old wood and dust. He walked into the parlor, his eyes immediately drawn to the gramophone. He remembered the stories his grandfather had told him, and a new, adult curiosity was sparked within him. He dusted off the old machine, the brass horn gleaming under the morning light. He found the last record, the perfectly black one, still on the turntable. He picked it up, feeling a strange energy radiating from it. He placed it on a new, modern turntable he had brought with him. He lowered the needle, his heart pounding a soft, uneven rhythm against his ribs. A single beautiful note filled the room, a note that was both a farewell and a greeting, a sound that was both old and new. It was the sound of a life, not ending, but beginning. It was the sound of a new listener, a new life, and a new song. The gramophone had found a new audience, and the cycle, now a beautiful and gentle one, was beginning again. The old house on the hill was no longer a tomb of secrets but a symphony of new beginnings.